organization. And the idea of it goes back to Peter Singer, and he is a management strategist, with the Sloan School of Management at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And his major work was called the fifth discipline, the art and practice of the learning organization, first published in 1990 and a revised edition in 2006. And his primary definition is that learning organizations are organizations where people continually expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, where new and expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured, and where collective aspiration are set free, and where people are continuing to learn together. So all of those key ideas are in there, and Claire's going to tease those out into practice as she presents her experiences. So the 5 disciplines that Singer refers to are really just like principles and then practices, and very much around people. The people are at the center of it all. People through personal mastery are the active force, and basically organizations can only learn through individuals who learn. So it's organic in that sense. Second discipline is then mental models. So understanding how individuals view, understand, and interpret the world around them. Importantly, the collective shared vision is really is valuable. So people are connected by having a shared, fresh vision of the future. It's not about today, it's about the journey forward, about learning how to move into the future. And again, not doing it on your own, but doing it as part of team learning. So working with others is a critical angle. And the 5th one is systems thinking. So understanding that the world is a complex system, but with interconnections between different elements, and then finding new ways to solve problems and implement change. Another approach, which comes from Pian, Roderick, and Mulrooney, is the INVEST model. And this is just an acrostic model there. So I for inspired learners, again, the people are at the center, but having a nurturing culture, being in an environment where learning is conducive, having a vision for the future, management encouraging learning, management being supportive, and then again, those ideas of transforming structures. Now, their model is mapped to a maturity model. So moving from a foundation situation through evolving experience, developing, and then maturing, so that organizations or individuals can be tracked across that maturity model. And here's just a list of a few of the characteristics which really build on those ideas that have been presented already. So it's about inquiry and dialogue, not accepting the status quo, but actually wanting to learn how to do things differently. Making it safe for people to share amongst themselves and to take risks. So that learning never really happens unless you're challenged to test new ideas. That involves then creativity, having lots and lots of learning opportunities, and understanding that staff use learning to reach their own goals, and that those goals will then contribute to the goals of the organization. And so that everyone is aware of that that organic process. And 3 key areas are suggested by Garvin, Edmondson, and Gino in 2008. Having a supportive learning environment, and there's a few ideas there about how that might happen. Ensuring that there are concrete learning practices and processes in place. And that again comes back to the ideas of it being experimental, having the opportunity to learn and develop. And also that's of environmental scanning, understanding what's happening, say for libraries, what the new trends are so that you can keep up to date there. But very importantly, having that leadership that encourages and reinforces learning. Without a strong leadership with that philosophy, none of it will happen productively. So finally, just a few reasons there as to why. Okay, change is there. And this really challenges us to think about our beliefs and practices and to consider new ways of doing them. To give people hope that it's not always going to be this way. We can work through and get some new ideas to demonstrate that everyone's ideas are valued. It's not top down, it's actually across the whole organization. And therefore it challenges staff to stretch beyond their own perceived limits. And it's, as I say, it's not just the leaders who are involved in this, but regardless of your position, you have the possibility to contribute to the whole process of the learning organization. So once again, to emphasize that it's a safe place to take risks and to be a playground for creative ideas. And most of the people agree that just being in a learning organization is more fun. So on that note, just to summarize there, it's all about the organization, and I'm really excited to hear from Claire about how she's been able to put this into practice in her own experience.
Thank you, Jill, for that segment of making us understand the concept a little bit more. And I think that would help as a good segue to the next segment, which is the one by Claire. So we will now have the article focus, transforming a university library into a learning organization. And this would be led by the author herself, Clare Thorpe. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Rajan, for the introduction, and thank you, Jill, for setting the scene very beautifully. Jill and I haven't collaborated on the presentations this evening, but she's actually put in a lot of the things I'm going to talk about as well. So thank you, Jill, very much for that. And thank you for the invitation from the CPDWL for the opportunity to speak with you today. In Australia, we begin meeting together by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we work and live. Today, I'm speaking to you from Yunganbeh land, which you may know as the Gold Coast. I acknowledge and I pay my respects to the ancestors, the elders, and the descendants of the land on which I stand. I am mindful that these lands always were and always will be Aboriginal land. So today our focus is around how we can transform libraries into learning organisations. And we're going to explore some approaches and ideas that Jill's already alluded to about how we can enact cultural change in the way that we work as individuals and teams. Now, librarianship was not my first career. I came to it about 20 years ago, having spent 4 years in my previous career. And I didn't expect to stay in libraries for so long. I fully expected to spend a few years working in libraries and then get bored and go and find something else to do. But here I am. And the reason that I think I've stayed working in libraries is not only because I personally find the work meaningful, but because I also find it learningful. There is always something to learn. And the quote on screen sums up my approach to both my work today and my career journey so far. And Jill's already mentioned the work of Peter Seng, who really is considered the father of learning organisations. And so I love this quote about being learningful. We are a profession that empowers our clients by connecting them to people and information to support them as they grow, learn and succeed. But we also need to turn that lens onto ourselves and to support each other in learning and growing as library professionals. So today I'll share with you some of my thoughts and perspectives, drawing on the research literature, some of which Jill's already highlighted, and also from my own lived experience. Now, some of what I say may be more relevant to those of you who are in leadership roles, but I do hope that no matter where you currently are in your career journey, you'll hear something that will inspire you to keep learning. So what do you think about when you think about professional development or workplace learning? And you might like to use the chat to pop in your ideas. Do you think about programs where you go and someone teaches you or gives you a hands-on training session about how to use a new tool or understand a new process? Is it about going to conferences or online events such as this one? Is it about independent learning, where you take the opportunity to teach yourself something new that relates to your job? Or is it that compulsory training you have to do every year to understand which fire alarm is which? All of these make up workplace learning, but they are only part of the whole. So when I think about professional development, I think about three things that I need to be a supportive learner, which Jill has already highlighted for us this evening. Firstly, I need an environment that's supportive, to be surrounded by people who understand and engage in learning and who are on a learning journey with me. I also need clear guidelines so I know when it's okay to engage in learning, what tools, resources, and maybe even funding that I might have access to, and what processes and accountability I should have in place and follow. And I need leaders who model learning for work. Now, as the leader in my library, I'm interested in approaches to professional development that aren't just about going to conferences or mandatory training. What I'm interested in developing is a culture in my library where staff know that they have permission to explore topics and skills related to their work and interests via tools and technologies that suit their own learning styles. And I also want my teams to be sharing what they're learning with each other, to be encouraging each other to be creative and experimental, and to enjoy the challenge as they grow. Now, I want to be really clear here that I'm not against going to conferences. In fact, I love a good conference and I miss them dearly. And I love hearing the big ideas that keynote speakers share with us and meeting people and adding them to my professional networks. But in the past, I've worked with people who have only defined professional development as going to conferences, and that was it. Now, that's not a sustainable model of workplace learning. It's very expensive and it focuses on the individual who gets chosen to go, and it's certainly not realistic in the COVID-19 environment. So my personal understanding of professional development is much broader, and it encompasses both passive, consuming type activities and also more active, creating and engaging learning activities. And these can be all done in a digital workplace environment. They don't involve travelling to a particular place or time. The other thing that these activities also have in common is that they are reflective, they are often social, and they are creative. And I hope that today you will leave with a broader definition of professional learning. And I hope that I will inspire you to be curious, confident, and committed. So how do we foster an environment where curiosity is rewarded and where learning is seen as a natural part of the everyday work that we do in libraries? Well, I believe in leveraging positive motivation. People come to work for a whole range of reasons, and on Monday mornings, that might be quite different to what it is on Friday mornings. And it can be for negative reasons, for financial reasons, for family pressures and other reasons. But I prefer to focus on positive motivators and to use those as ways of engaging with staff. And these are three positive motivators that I've found are quite common and come out of the work of McGregor and Doshi. So the first is that people come to work because they enjoy it. They find it playful, they enjoy the challenge of solving problems, and they find the work creative. You might come to work in your library because you're passionate about the purpose of libraries and it resonates with your own personal values. Or it might be that you have career aspirations and that in your role, you can see the opportunity to grow and develop and to achieve your next goal. Now, the people who are coming to work with these motivations in mind are the people that I want to work with. And these are the frames that I want to encourage them through. And I believe in each of these frames, we can see a connection to people's learning goals and to that idea of how we can learn in the workplace. So thanks to Jill for introducing this idea. And this is quite common for anyone who has studied organisational cultural change. But for a team to succeed, it really needs to have a common goal, a clear direction and a shared understanding of what we want to achieve and what's accepted and expected within our teams. So how many of you have a definition of professional development in your workplace? Is this something that you've ever talked about or tried to define about what it means for your context and environment? I found this to be a very powerful way of starting the conversation and co-creating a shared understanding or definition with my team so that we're all moving in the same direction. Because as I've already demonstrated, my definition for professional development can be quite different to the way that other people define it and understand it. So what do I think makes a good definition? Well, firstly, it has to be tailored to your context. A professional development definition for a hospital library will be very different to one in a public library, for example. And each library has its own unique financial, environmental, strategic constraints. But it should be easy to understand, and it should be able to be related to everyone, regardless of their place in the hierarchy. So here's an example I developed at a previous workplace, and I've highlighted a few key points in this definition. Firstly, you can see that we're very explicit up front about stating our goal to becoming a learning organisation. And we give people permission to see learning as an everyday activity. We've connected professional development and workplace learning to the individual's current role and their future aspirations. But we've also highlighted that this is about collaboration. This is something we do together, and the benefit of that is that we have a more skilled and a more capable workforce. So once you have a shared definition, it's very important that you don't let it collect dust and you don't just park it on the intranet and never look at it again. You need to use it and talk about it and socialise it. And the questions on screen are ones that maybe leaders or supervisors could use when they're talking to individuals about what it means for them. But they could just as easily be used with each other in a team meeting so that we can start to work together to see commonalities in the learning goals that we want to achieve as individuals, but also as a library moving forward. Confidence comes through certainty. And that certainty is when we know how to navigate the expectations, the processes and the barriers that we might perceive are in place to stop us from learning. Now, the research literature, not surprisingly, tells us that the most common barriers that people cite are time and money. But I'd also argue that lack of understanding and ownership of whose responsibility this is also something that makes people hesitant. So we spend time on things that we value and that are important to us. And if you think about your personal life and the things that you spend time on, you will be able to identify really clearly those things that are important to you. The same applies in the workplace. So if we want our library staff members to participate in learning, we need to talk to them about how time spent learning is valuable to them personally, but to the organisation more broadly. The same with cost. We are very lucky to work in a collaborative industry that believes in open access to information and knowledge. But there are reasons that learning opportunities cost, and some of those are legitimate. And so sometimes we do need to spend money to get that additional skill or access to resources that we need. But I believe that costs can return dividends to the library, and you can exploit you can get more value from the cost investment. But it does mean having transparent and accountable processes and making it really clear to your staff about how they can apply for funding. And making processes easy, fair and equitable so that costs are not seen as just something that the elite few get access to. But you do need to be clear what that return on investment is and what's expected of people who do attend funded events. And I'm going to come back to that point soon. But as I said, one of the other barriers that I've seen in play is a lack of understanding of the individual's responsibility and the employer's responsibility. Whose job is it anyway? So the Continuing Professional Development and Workplace Learning section, who are one of our hosts today, have this poster that identifies 5 partners in the professional learning practice. I'm focusing on just 3 today, but the 2 that I've admitted are library educators and training providers. But today I just want to focus on the role of the individual, the role of the library as employer, and also a little bit about the role of our library associations. So what we see on this screen is not a dependent model where employers or library associations tell individual staff members what they must learn in order to be a good library professional. This is not a learned helplessness or dependent model, but rather it's an interdependent collective approach with a joint and shared commitment from the individual, the employer, and at the industry level. So each person is responsible for their own learning. My career is my career, and yours will be unique to you. We have different learning needs. But there are some times when employers do need to provide training opportunities and things like orientation or onboarding for new staff, or training related to a significant implementation project, or workplace health and safety requirements. Library associations also have an opportunity here, and I'll give a shout out to them in just a minute. But between the individual and the employer, I believe the best kind of learning happens in partnership, where our staff move away from being passively told what to learn to actively designing their own learning journey in collaboration with their supervisor and the other people in their team. Last year, when the pandemic first struck and we moved very rapidly into an off-site and distributed working model, I attended a number of online events such as this one. And I remember hearing people who worked for other institutions say things like, well, we've been meaning to teach our staff how to use Microsoft Teams, but we just hadn't got there yet. We had that down for July. Now, this wasn't a problem at my library because we'd long ago abandoned that approach of teaching people how to use a software program when it was rolled out. Instead, we gave them access to the tool and we gave them permission to experiment and play so they could see how that particular tool could be used to communicate within their teams and to manage information. And so when we transitioned to working off-site, that was one less thing they had to cope with, and it stood them in really good stead as they started to work in a distributed digital work model. Our professional associations do a fantastic job of providing learning opportunities such as this one, of raising awareness and championing the value of continuous learning. And if you're not a member of your local professional association, I would encourage you to investigate your options in that space. So how can we encourage our staff to become more confident in taking responsibility for their own learning? Well, firstly, I think we do need to connect that shared understanding and common goal that we have to the what's in it for me, and link that to individual performance review conversations, but also the purpose of the institution, the library, and even the client needs. Make it really explicit how all the puzzle pieces connect. Encourage staff to learn in ways that make sense to them, either on their own or in groups. And perhaps highlight opportunities and current service challenges that they might like to focus their learning on. And don't just think it has to be about library stuff. There's lots that we can learn from other service industries and other models out there. And you'll notice that many of the references that both Jill and I have drawn on today don't come from the library literature. There are so many opportunities for us to learn, particularly in the digital workplace, and we can stimulate and create a desire to learn amongst our team. I try not to assume that everyone has the same contacts or access or engages in industry or social networking in the same way that I do. So when I do find something that I found particularly meaningful or learningful to me, I try and share it with my peers, with my reports, and with other people who I think might be interested in it. In the digital workplace, as I've already said, it is relatively easy to use tools such as Microsoft Teams or Chat or Slack to create channels that can be dedicated to sharing learning ideas and activities. Now, it might be that sometimes leaders have to start the conversation, but ideally these work best when they're led by peers. And in my workplaces, we encourage staff to read widely, from informal to more formal and scholarly work, to listen to podcasts, to catch up on webinar recordings such as these, or to participate live as we are today, and to experiment and play with cool tools, browser plugins, and new technologies. What I avoid doing is giving them a prescriptive list of activities to complete, but rather encourage them to investigate topics, tools, that smorgasbord of options that relate to their current work, to the work of their colleagues, and perhaps even to their future career aspirations. And a great example of this is the Australian and Library Information Association's PD Postings newsletter, which is sent each month to members and showcases a range of learning and development ideas tailored to different sectors and different specialties within the library and information sector. Confident staff know where to find learning opportunities, how to participate, and they know what's expected of them as a learner. And often when I'm starting to talk to people about professional development and my expectations for them, I use this model, which I've adopted from Kolb's learning styles. Attending an event or engaging in learning is the first 10%. Deeper learning comes when we engage in reflective practice, when we share our knowledge and we apply learning to our workplace. And this is the return on investment that I see. And this is why I'm very passionate about this. If my staff follow this approach, then any time or money that's spent away from their day job will not be wasted. In fact, it will return dividends many times over. My staff will be more skilled, they'll be more engaged, more motivated, more reflective. But more importantly, they'll start to develop more innovative and transformative services. And my end goal is I'll have more satisfied clients. So this is the transparent return on investment that I use to demonstrate to my teams the value I see in workplace learning, to overcome those perceived barriers of time, cost, and responsibility. Now, my return on investment model works best when learning is seen as a social responsibility, not just something that happens in isolation by individuals. And I'm very clear that I expect my team to reflect and share on their learning, and I encourage them to think about their participation deeply. I don't want them to attend events as a one-shot activity that's done and soon forgotten. I don't want them to be ticking off checkboxes. But what I encourage them to do is to share. This does cause anxiety for people. I'll be really honest. This is the part that people get the most anxious about, particularly if they're not confident in presenting or they don't know how to design a report back strategy. So what I generally talk people through is what works for them. So if they're more comfortable writing a blog post or a report and sharing that with the team, that's absolutely fine. If they're more comfortable having a lunchtime Zoom chat with people to informally report back on what they've learned, that's also fine. But one of the frameworks I've found resonates with a lot of people is this 3-2-1 approach. And this is from Michael Stevens from San Jose State University and the Tame the Web blog site. And he encourages people to reflect on 3 things that have amazed you, 2 concepts that you will focus on and investigate more, and 1 idea you can apply immediately. And I found this to be a very easy process that people are able to follow. And you might like to adopt this strategy as you reflect on today's session. So how do you know when you have a library that is a learning organisation? How do you know that your teams are committed? Over my library career, I've done a little bit of work in the evidence-based library and information practice space. So as I reflected on libraries as learning organisations, I looked for evidence of cultural change in my workplace. Now, cultural change is really hard to measure. So on screen are some of the approaches that I've attempted to use in the past to identify both a baseline and then to measure improvement. Now, I'm not going to claim that all of these are successful, but they are things that I've tried. So if your institution has a staff survey mechanism, quite often there's a question in there around career development opportunities or workplace learning. And you can use that data to measure change over time. I would encourage you to have a look at your retention rates, Why are people leaving your organisation? Is it because they're going to bigger and better things, or they're pursuing other interests, or is it for other reasons? And also look at the type of people that you're attracting when you are recruiting for new roles. I find it very interesting to see how that changes once your reputation as a learning organisation is well known in your local industry. One of the other things I've looked at in the past is how many people in my library are personal members of their local library association. And that can be interesting to have a look and to reflect on. I once had a staff member actually contact me quite out of the blue to ask whether I thought joining the Australian Library and Information Association's professional development scheme was worthwhile. She'd been inspired by the work that we had done in defining a learning organisation and encouraging the staff to learn. And so she wanted to actually seek accreditation for that by joining ALIA's PD scheme. Now, obviously I said yes, and I'm very pleased to say that she did choose to do that, and she has continued to do that. And I really do consider her to be one of my success stories. One of the other things I look at is how are staff contributing in industry, not just as members of the association, but through publishing and scholarship and presentations at conferences and the like. So rather than just actively participating, how are they contributing to progressing our profession and contributing to the conversation? So that's something I've also tracked in the past. Qualitative measures can also be just as insightful, like the conversation I had with my colleague about whether she should join the association and get credit for her PD learning. Individual staff performance conversations are a great time to take a temperature check and see how your library is growing and the types of feedback that you're getting from staff about their learning goals. And as I've mentioned, have a look at reputation, and you'll be able to determine that through lots of different ways. So as I've mentioned, one of the ways that I've measured cultural change in the past is to have a look at how staff are engaged in storytelling, both within the library, their confidence as it builds in report back strategies, but also beyond the library, how they engage in scholarship and evidence-based communication. Now, there's a whole other presentation that I can do about the importance of communication as part of being an evidence-based practitioner. But some of the reasons on screen are why I think engaging in this type of learning activity is an important marker of being a learning organisation, because it does encourage you to reflect and reinterpret what you've learned in a way as you tell it to other people. It does create that social aspect to the learning, and it advances our profession as we share our successes and failures. Perhaps you're already thinking about how you might share a story with your team about what you've learned from today's session. I probably should have titled this talk, Curious, Confident, Committed and Connected, because I believe that learning organisations grow together in maturity. By fostering a culture of learning and professional development, we grow stronger in our connections and collaborations within our teams and libraries, within our industry, with our professional associations, and also with our clients. And in the separated digital working environment that many of us are still in, being connected with professionals who have a common goal towards learning, we're bonding in the uncertain environment we find ourselves in is more important than ever. So as I finish up today, here are some takeaways that you might like to think about. I encourage you to think about learning as a natural part of your working day. Don't make it an add-on or a checklist activity. I encourage you to be curious, and I was really pleased to hear Jill use that word in her introduction today. Create safe spaces where you and others can experiment and be creative. Be an independent learner. Use the digital workplace, the online resources of our industry and social media to find new opportunities to learn wherever you are. Understand the value of learning to you as a professional and to your organisation and your clients, and be able to articulate your responsibility and the responsibility of your employer and professional associations so that that value statement is clear. Start sharing stories with each other. This will help build confidence within yourself and with others, and also competence. And most importantly, take time out to celebrate your successes. I believe that libraries with strong learning cultures are identified by their ability to innovate and transform their services and to respond to evolving client needs and environmental uncertainty. These are libraries where staff independently and collaboratively develop new skills, where they feel supported by their leaders and in turn lead each other in learning as part of their everyday work, where we hear and we share stories of success, failure and learning. These are libraries that are curious, confident, committed and connected. And these are the libraries that I want to work in, and I hope you do too as well. Thank you very much for coming today, and I believe there's going to be some opportunity to talk amongst each other and tease out some of these ideas further.
Thank you, Claire, for that great presentation. I would just like to quickly highlight to the participants that we do have a technical problem with the breakout room. So what we're going to do is actually use the chat feature, and or you could unmute yourself and ask questions. But before we do that and give Claire some time to catch her breath again, let me read some of the comments that appeared in the chat, Claire, whilst the participants actually think about questions they may ask you and Jill as well. So I think a lot of colleagues were asking, will we get a copy of the slides? So Jill, will their wish be granted?
Totally, absolutely. We're going to share all of our learnings. That's the given message that Claire has shared. So yeah, no, there's no problem with that at all. As you said, it will be recorded. And as soon as we have the link, we'll make sure that that's sort of put out through the normal channels, etc. And with the supporting materials. Sure, thanks.
No, that's great. And Claire as well. So I think in terms of your slide deck, and I think what's really nice to see is that the attendees have not ran away because of the breakout room and actually still staying for the conversation, which is great. So I think another colleague, Mary, highlighted, I think when you asked these questions about which of the above, and she said all of the above. And then another colleague, Annie Patrak, said learning in groups or individually in order to improve my performance and outputs. And also colleagues such as Claire Carlson mentioned that development over time, not just skills, but a desire to develop and explore. Further down, I think Almut, our colleague and section member, mentioned PD for me is whatever new knowledge or skill I can obtain that supports me in my job. That's interesting. And Jennifer Diggins mentioned, I agree with you, Claire. I love to learn from colleagues, from work experience or personnel. And moving down further, let me see. So
I think Jennifer's asked a question there, Rajan, which is, do I support older workers to learn and grow in my library? Absolutely, yes. I started working in my current role in July. And one of the first things that I did was to make time to meet with each person in my library and to learn more about their story, how they'd got to the place that they were in their career and what their future plans were. And so I met a whole range of people at different stages of their career journey. But some of those people were very explicit to me and said, look, you know, I'm planning to retire in 1, 2, 3 or 4 years' time. Now, I had a great conversation with every single one of those people who really, I very much agreed that they wanted to finish strong. And so there is absolutely no reason why I'm not going to continue to invest in them. I certainly want to support them in their learning because their job will continue to change over the next 1, 2, 3 or 4 years. And I need them to continue to work in that. And so there will be skills that they need to learn. but I'm also going to use them and take this opportunity because they've given me forewarning that they'll be leaving in the not too distant future. And how can I use them to mentor and coach and share knowledge with other staff members so that we don't lose that wonderful knowledge and expertise that they have as they move on to the next chapter of their life. So regardless of where you are, how long you've been in industry, what your age is, what your future plans are, I definitely want to work with you to support you in your learning.
Thank you, Claire. And I think looking at the chat, yes, there's some follow-up responses to April's question. And I think, how do you encourage staff workers who do not really want to participate and prioritize PD in their career? And Almut also highlighted that this is a very good question, April. And I think, yeah, some follow-up is there some sort of reward or incentive mechanisms implemented in your institution?
So I think, April, it's a great question. And again, it comes down to everyone's individual learning journey. And I've had to learn not to put my own ambitions on other people. And not everyone wants to learn to the same degree that I do. Not everyone's as energized or passionate about this as I am. However, I come back to the idea that we are a team and we have a shared understanding. So as an organisation, as a library, every single person who works with me has agreed to that shared understanding around having a commitment to learning because of the way that it will make their job easier today. It will make their client service better tomorrow, and it will make us all better at what we do. So regardless of whether people want to build a career or whether they just want to enjoy their job more, I find a way of getting them to understand how they see themselves within that shared understanding and that common goal that we've set together as a team. It's not me telling them what the goal is, it is something that we do together. So that's part of it. The other part is that every single position description, every job description in my library does have in it, as one of the responsibilities, a line about continuing to develop skills and to participate in learning. So it's actually articulated as part of their job. So really no one's got an excuse not to do it, but the way that they do it might be different depending on the individual's needs, the role that they do, their team's activities, and a whole range of those other things. And that's why it's got to be a partnership. It's got to be the individual working with their supervisor, working with me as director of the library, to make sure that they're working in the way that they want to work and engaging in learning so that we all benefit together. I don't particularly have any identified rewards and incentives, but as Jill said at the start, this actually makes work more fun. And I don't know about you, but I like to work in environments where the work gets easier because we have the skills to do what we need to do and we have the resources that we need, but we also are engaged in those positive motivations. And I don't particularly like to, I guess, use rewards or incentives as motivations, apart from identifying goals and targets within the performance review conversations. And I know, Rajan, that you've been going through that performance review cycle with your team at the moment. We were talking about that last week, and I know that's something that many of us have to do, regardless of which country or library we're in. And I think it is about more tapping into the personal motivators rather than having financial awards or awards or incentives for learning. Because as I said, I want people to be doing this because they feel connected to it, because they can see the value to the library, they can see the value to our clients, not because I'm going to give them a certificate of achievement at the end, perhaps. So that's my personal take. I don't know if Rajan or Jill want to jump in at this point.
No, thank you very much, Claire. And maybe I can draw Jill into the discussion and conversation. So Jill, in terms of your take on this and some perspectives as well.
Right, in terms of specifically just reward and recognition, that sort
Absolutely.
of angle. Yeah. I think it's exceptionally difficult if you think about learning outcomes. as Claire mentioned at the very beginning, just about attendance. That's just the sort of baseline. And therefore, to give a certificate of attendance, how is that meaningful? All right, it's really problematic. And in fact, for CPDWL, we've had, you know, questions from potential audience people to sort of say, well, I'm going to attend, so therefore I need a certificate. And, you know, it really comes back to those 3, 2, 1 from Michael Stevens. You know, the very bottom one is, how are you going to apply this? What are your takeaways that you're going to say, this has inspired me to actually change or to discuss or to explore? So those sort of different areas of things that you can do. So yeah, and I'm totally with Claire on, you know, it's about the personal motivation, the engagement, the mental stimulation that comes from learning. It's not about a piece of paper as such. So
thanks a lot, Jill, because I know even when we, when we organized this webinar, we had lots of inquiries about, will I get a certificate of participation, etc. So, it also begs the question, you could be logged in, but are you engaged in, and you hear, for the entire duration. So Jill, Claire, I can see a lot more comments and questions in the chat. So perhaps we should address this. And I think Mariana Marks, she mentioned, thank you, Claire. Although I'm not a leader, I do put in place a lot of the topics covered today. And I agree, learning is a continuous process, and I'm constantly seeking more knowledge. So that was some sharing from Mariana. But Viva also has an interesting question. How can I grow in digital library culture? How can you support others? They want learning in the same library area. So I think, Viva, what you're trying to highlight here is about the whole digital library workplace. Is that perhaps what you are highlighting, and then encouraging others to also kind of learn in this environment? Okay. Any response, Claire, Jill? Yeah.
Sure. I guess the first thing to say is that I do want to acknowledge that over the past year and a half, or almost 2 years now, while we've been working in completely different ways to the normal, it is incredibly difficult for people to have energy and mental capacity to engage in things other than just surviving the new ways of working. And that's absolutely fine. We've all been learning to adapt to new ways of working. So I don't want you to feel, if you are struggling in that space with lockdowns and stay-at-home orders and the like, to feel that you have to be doing something else on top. So I just wanted to be really clear about that. And I probably should have put that in the presentation. But even prior to COVID, I have been working in a library service that was geographically separate. So we have, I worked at universities for the last 4 years who are at campuses that are up to 200, 500 kilometres apart, which means we've always had to communicate digitally and virtually. We were Zooming well before it was an internet meme. And so we've always looked at different ways to learn together through digital channels, but also to learn separately through some of the digital and online resources that we have. And I talked about in the presentation about raising awareness of the whole range of different resources that are available in the digital workspace. Most of the things that I use for learning these days are not in-person events or print books. They are attending events such as this in online environments. They are about engaging with digital resources, tools and technologies. But I think the most important thing is working out how do you share what you've learned to create that culture of learning when you are geographically separate and you can't have a casual conversation with people in the tea room. And that's why I think you do need to have a little bit more structure, and providing your team or working with your team to work out ways that you can do that, whether that's through some kind of channel or communication, a chat, or something like Microsoft Teams, or even just having a standing item on your team agenda, 5 minutes every month, who's learned something this week, and making it a normal part of conversation that's not lost in all of the other chats and emails and Zooming that we do. So you do need to carve out time and space for it and dedicate some technology perhaps, and encourage people to share what they've learned, because that's where the value comes, when it goes from being just that attendance and engaging 10% as a single person to sharing what I've learned with others and applying that in the workplace. So that's where the challenge is. And I think we tend to do it more easily when we're co-located and we can have corridor conversations, or that general chatter you'd have in a meeting room before you got to the agenda. But when we don't have that, we do need to actually prioritise it and make it an important part of our formal conversations in whatever form.
Thank you, Claire. Jill, anything to chime in on Claire's response?
That's right. Yes, as in response to the question, and then also listening to Claire as well, putting the CPDWL hat on. We are working on the guidelines at the moment. So across the world, there is actually a set of IFLA guidelines on best practices, principles and best practices for continuing professional development. And that to date has been very much the physical environment where Claire started, about going to conferences and things like that, the things that make learning work in a face-to-face situation. So the brief for the standing committee at the moment is to update those guidelines and to consider what are the principles and best practices for online sort of virtual activities. Because you can't guarantee just by having the tools, with respect, Claire, that it's going to work. There needs to be an understanding, and especially in some of our emerging economies, it's all new. It's very new, and therefore I think it's very important for us in the more developed countries where it is, everyday activity to be able to jump online to Microsoft Teams, to think about what needs to be considered to make something effective. Just putting something online, as we've probably all experienced, isn't the way to go. So we are working on that. It's a very big job, but we'd love to hear from any of you out there about your own cultures, your own countries, where there are some practices and some principles that you'd like to share with us as well. But we hope to get that work done by sort of about the middle of next year, promising. At the WLIC, the IFLA conference in August, we did have a really engaging panel discussion where we took the stakeholders from our poster, or from the guidelines, which is the learner and the employer, the association, the educator, and the training provider. And we had a representative of all of those. So if you're interested in that sort of area, please go back to that as a learning activity as well, to listen in and think about some of the applications in your own context as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jill. Claire, Jill, there's so many more questions here, so maybe let me get on to it. So I have a question here from Dr. Marianne. So she asks, what particular learning support or programs you offered to your organization, and how do you assess whether their expected learning outcome has been met? Any response?
So I guess this comes down to, and this is a personal thing for me. I don't work in large libraries, so my current staffing is under 30. So I don't have the luxury of being able to take staff offline for long periods of time to run everybody through a structured program. Having said that, I do work in a university, so we do have a department in the university who coordinates learning opportunities that aren't necessarily library related, but are more related to different skills across the university, like managing and leading people, or supporting students and the like. So where I can, I refer staff to engage with the opportunities within the institution rather than having a structured facilitated program within the library. And this is where it comes down to a conversation between the individual, the employee, and their supervisor. Now, as the director of the library, I'm not always involved in those, and that's okay. But it is very much that partnership model that Jill was talking about in the poster there. It has to be about people identifying their learning goals, understanding how that connects to the shared goal that we have to become a learning organisation, and then negotiating with their supervisor which of those programs that they might see offered in the university that they would like to attend, and managing the time out of work appropriately. So it's very much a case-by-case basis. Sometimes there are offer as a structured approach. So for example, where I'm working at the moment, our small group of librarians have taken on responsibility for supporting our researchers this year. Now, they've never done that before, and we don't want them to fail. So we have been taking them through a semi-structured approach to I think it's the 21 Research Things program from Curtin University, which is available under Creative Commons license. So we have one team leader who has expertise in this space. And so she's generously facilitating that. And that is a reflective process where she does some facilitated activities, and then the individual librarians work through the interactive resources and reflective activities as well. And that addresses a particular business need that I have at the moment. But that sort of thing is not something that's necessarily we would do every year, but it's addressing a particular need now. And that's, I think I did mention about that idea of seeing what your current challenges, service challenges are, and responding to those appropriately. And the way that we'll assess that program is that there is actually sort of reflections built into that. And so staff will be sharing those with each other as part of their learning.
And then also, as you said earlier, the real assessment is that the clients are happy, right? That you're growing the business and they're going to come back for more.
Yeah, and I guess that, you know, what I wasn't probably as explicit about in the presentation is why we're doing this. Well, it's so that we have return clients and they're satisfied and they're getting the services that they need, and we respond to their emerging and evolving needs. It's not about me as the director going, look at me, I made a learning organisation, yippee. It is about making sure we're delivering the best services in the best possible ways and meeting the client's needs, and future-proofing and being ready to anticipate how those needs might change in the future.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Joe. So what I'm going to do is just read some of the comments in the chat whilst you have a sip of water and perhaps get ready for the responses. So Nikki Mason mentioned, Claire, I think you mentioned you have been in your current role since July. Can you share any milestones achieved with your team's transformation to a learning culture? Jennifer also highlights that learning and reading are essential to everyone to grow and keep their minds active. And Viva continues her conversation to say that sometimes I learned a lot from internet, but I need a platform to perform as a library professional or employee. I'm talking here related to myself. And so in terms of, I think Anki Tisia, she mentioned time is an obstacle that Claire mentioned, which I think is most often brought up when it comes to professional development. No time. But for learning, sharing, reflecting, we need time and an environment that allows it. How do I achieve this change of attitude, mind shift, to give myself time, to take time because it's worth it? I need time for that too. And how do you motivate yourself, Claire, to keep at it?
I'm going to go back to Nikki's question first. So yes, I've been in my current job for just over 3 months, and I have actually been kind to myself and not tried to be too judgmental about how much I've achieved in 3 months, to be honest. Interestingly enough, I came into the organisation I currently work for, and they had already set up a professional development working group. So they must have known I was coming. And so they have 4 champions in that group out of the team of 30. And those people are currently essentially working on a strategy of how we're going to develop as a learning organisation. And so I've been able to share with them the work that I'd done previously and some of the evidence that I'd drawn on in the research literature. But to a large degree, I've then had to sort of step back and let them do it. Because as I've mentioned, this isn't about me as director parachuting in and telling people how to learn. It needs to be driven by the team. And so I am giving them a bit of space to develop those recommendations. And they've already done, I think, 1 presentation to the staff, and they'll be doing more of that as we head into our performance review round next month. So it's, I'm really encouraged at how well they're already working in this way and putting into practice some of the things I've talked about. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily my achievements, but I'm very happy to encourage them and to support them as they continue to work out how to do this. But it's a watch this space. We need to, cultural change takes time. It's not a 3-month endeavour, I'm afraid. And I do, you know, if I'm going to use some of those measurements too, they take time to measure as well. So I'm considering what measures I might use to look at that over the next 6 to 12 months. Archie's question about time is also an interesting one. I guess the thing I would encourage you to think about when you're thinking about time is know yourself. So I read something earlier this year, and it was a blog post basically talking exactly about this. I'll see if I can dig it up, but it was one of those things I read quickly and went, oh, that's really useful, I'm going to use that, and then didn't bookmark it. But the writer was talking about understanding when she learnt best in the week. For her, it was first thing on a Monday morning. That was when she was at her best and she could carve out time from 8:30 till 10 o'clock to do some of the learning things that she'd found the week prior or the like. And that really challenged me because I kind of thought, you know, learning is maybe something that you do last thing on a Friday when everything else is ticked off. And it made me really think about, well, when do I learn best? When is the time that I have in my day or in my week when I can actually do this? And I realized that for me, it's the first half hour of the day. So I use the first half hour of my day to check my social media feeds and to see if there's anything that's come up that relates to things that I'm currently learning. And that's the opportunity for me to print off an article or reflect on something when I'm still fresh. And I must admit that I do reward myself after that 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour with my coffee. So I do have a little reward for myself at the end of that short reflection time at the start of the day when I am fresh and I am able to learn. Now that doesn't suit everyone, but for me, that's how I find I can carve out that little bit of time before I get into the nitty-gritty of the emails and the meetings and the rest. But that might be quite different for you. It might maybe for you it's lunchtime. Maybe for you it's last thing you do before you go home at the end of the day. But I would encourage you to I guess reflect on that and work out when is a time of the week or the time of the day or an occasional time when you can actually carve out a little bit of reflection or reading or sharing a story or having time with someone else to have a conversation that engages you in learning. When do you learn, Jill? Do you have a good learning time?
All day, every day, I think. Work I'm doing for Alia. I walk in the morning. So I take an hour's walk when I get up, and that's a reflective time. There's, you know, no technology, no nothing, and the birds are singing, and it's all lovely. So I find that very productive to actually sort my things out. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, it varies. It's the opportunity. Don't underestimate, I think, that sharing over a cup of coffee or whatever it might be, a cup of tea, the opportunity to discuss something is when the ideas happen. All right, so it's not an insular activity. The way the brain works in terms of creativity and challenging and finding new pathways to learn things can be a shared experience. And Claire and I have a common colleague, Helen, and it was just the most amazing sparking of ideas that would happen over, just a cup of coffee, and and we developed lots of things. So yeah, otherwise, yeah, it depends. I'm learning Italian at the moment as a new language. I speak about 3 or 4 other languages, so I've taken on a new one, and that I definitely know it doesn't work for me in the evenings. If I've had a busy, cerebral day, then to start learning new vocabulary at that time of night, it's not going to work. But so again, lunchtime sort of is okay. But yeah, it varies. It depends on what you're trying to learn and what you're trying to. There's differences. But.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Claire.
I'll just say, I know Kate Davis has just put a comment in there around themes emerging in her research around informal and conversational PD. And I think, look, if the only thing you take away from today's session is that learning is a social and collaborative activity, then that's the most important thing. Is learning comes when we engage with each other. And I know that's difficult at the moment, but I look at this particular working group, and you are all in different time zones and countries, and you still manage to collaborate and to be creative and to generate some fantastic resources that we can all learn from. So do think about ways that you can collaborate and engage in that social learning in the digital workplace, and it will be different for your environment, your institution, your country, what you have access to, what you don't have access to. But all I say is just continue to do that, and to try and find people that are on a learning journey like yours, and take advantage of that and learn from each other and support each other.
Thank you, Claire. I'm babysitting the chat, and I post a question here for all the participants. Which is your best learning day and time? And Almut said definitely not early in the morning. So yeah, okay. And I think Eva Honung mentioned I am with Almut. And Almut goes on further to say, I agree with Jill. That means that I also have my best ideas when discussing things with others. Yeah, we kind of spark some thoughts as well. I think Kate Davis also mentioned, I'm currently working on a research project about professional learning for academics. And there is a strong theme emerging around informal conversational PD. Yes, I think that sounds interesting, Katie. And I guess we'll keep it in the parking lot for Claire and Jill to perhaps respond to that trending, emerging theme of informal conversational PD. I think Angie Thise also mentioned, yes, an important point, block time zones for learning and reflection. So we would give our staff the possibility to block the time for that, right? Okay, and Katie Davis said, learning happens when we engage with each other. And again, an exchange with Anki. Yes, Katie, absolutely. And Viva agrees with them as well. So some reactions and responses.
So I think Angie's comment there about giving staff the permission to block time off in their calendar is a really important one. And again, it is about how we spend time on things that are important to us. And if for you and your library, it is important that people spend time in learning activities, whatever that may be, then encouraging them to block off calendar time so that they are meeting free, or, that they're unavailable to other people, so that they can carve out that time for engaging or reflecting or sharing or having conversations, whatever it is. Then I really encourage you to do that. One of my team members from my previous job, She used to have a block in her calendar every Friday afternoon that very explicitly said learning time. Now, I don't know if she used that every Friday afternoon. I suspect she didn't, but she kept it in her calendar anyway. But I saw her grow and develop as a manager over the 2 or 3 years that I worked with her. So even though I wasn't asking her to necessarily be explicit about what she was learning, I could see it in her work performance, and I was able to celebrate that with her. And the fact that she maintained that block in her calendar about learning time encouraged me, because as I said, she felt that she had permission to do that, and whether she used that or not was really up to her as an independent learner. But I could see it in her performance regardless of whether she was doing it or not.
Yes, and I think just to build on that, it's how can you reflect if you don't have a time and space to do that? You can't do that with busy stuff happening. You need to take time out to be able to do that. When a few years ago, I was sort of the lead investigator for an e-portfolio project, so digital portfolios, and that was a national initiative across all of the universities in Australia. But then we needed to have sort of like a pilot study to see it in practice. And so with the new librarians here in Australia from one of their conferences, we ended up with a national little team of about 30 people came on board, and the reflection was then captured in their digital portfolio. And they were all career, they weren't students. The idea before was, what do students do in terms of capturing their learning? But this was actually about career librarians and what their goals and strategies were, and to reflect on the learning and capture it. And it's been really, really interesting. Yes, they self-nominated. It wasn't a random control trial at all. But the careers of those people who took time out to reflect and consider holistically their learning journey, their careers have just been on a most wonderful trajectory. It really has been fascinating to see the positive outcomes that come from that. But yes, you need time to put, to yourself, as well as a conversational side, but to reflect and capture it as well somehow, I think.
Thank you, Jill, for underscoring the importance of, setting that time. So I think looking at some more comments in the chat, Kate Rowe mentioned that finding those colleagues who you can have those important sharing conversation is so important. Being able to ask a dumb question and feel safe to share and build ideas is great. So yes, I think that is quite impactful. Ask any silly question or any stupid question. So have you had any dumb questions, Claire and Jill, anytime or so? Or, what would you consider as dumb or silly or something?
I don't think any dumb question is silly. In fact, I actually think the silly questions are the best ones, because that's when we challenge our assumptions and we don't sit in our own perceived ideas. And being brave enough to ask a question that you think might be silly is actually the most powerful thing that you can do. I ask what I consider, what might be considered basic or trivial questions all the time. Being new in my organisation, I have to. Otherwise, I'm never going to learn how things work around here. So I encourage you, just be curious, ask questions, don't judge your own questions, and challenge your assumptions.
And to add to that with the old, teaching hat on, that sort of the person who's brave to actually ask that sort of fundamental question, it's often sitting in somebody else's head or lots of people's head, and they're too scared to ask it. So it just triggers that dialogue and a sort of inquiry that can go with it. So no question is dumb in that sense, I don't think.
And I guess moving on to some of the other comments I see in the chat. So Eva Honung is actually sharing as we speak. So she says, hi, Kate Davis. I did some work on CPD and you may be interested. And she shared an article. So, and I think from the URL, it says continuing professional development of one-person librarians in Ireland, a qualitative study. So that looks intriguing. So perhaps once we click the link, we can read more. So Mary, my dear friend, Mary Zengita Zimba, thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Kate. We'll be reading your work. So again, I think Ange and Tisa mentioned, thank you, Jill and Claire, for your insights, shared experiences and knowledge. And same again with Kate Davis, fantastic, thank you, Eva. Yes, so yeah, a lot. Albina also says thank you as well. So perhaps if there's any final questions or reactions, etc., please do include it in the chat, and then we can pick it up for you as well. So I think we will be wrapping up very shortly, and instead of the breakout rooms, I thought that this is so much more enriching to hear, you know, from the trenches and hearing questions from the ground as well. So again, you know, do send in your questions. We will still be around. And I think I see a lot of thank you for sharing. And I guess maybe it is appropriate to say, sadly, we've come towards the end of the program. Our vote of thanks goes to Claire, Jill, and all the CPDWL members, and in particular, Carmen, Edward, and Ray for their support. This webinar would not have been possible without the support of NPSIG, in particular Magdalena and the IFLA family. So we do want to continue this type of conversation. So we're wanting to keep it practical. So please do kind of put in your comments in the short 2-question survey. I see somebody's hand raised. So perhaps let's just see if there's anything here. Bethany also says, thank you, Claire, Jill, and the IFLA CPDWL for the wonderful webinar. Also Eva, again. So final comments and thoughts from Claire and Jill, and we can maybe also wrap it up as well.
From my perspective, I'll jump in first, and it's just fantastic to see so many names in the chat of colleagues and friends across the world. It's really great to know that, shall I say, the work of CPDWL is out there, and that we've been able to bring so many people together in this context. So without the questions, none of them were done. So thanks to everybody who participated in that way as well, and stimulated the discussion that has happened in the second part of the event. Thank you. Claire?
I would just like to thank IFLA CPDWL for the opportunity to come today. And really the best thing that you can do after today's session is share what you've learned with others and start that ripple effect, and start to share your learnings and start to create that culture by having those conversations and starting to talk about what it is to be a learning organisation in your library. So please draw on the work that this team is doing. It's amazing, and I know that they're going to continue to support libraries all around the globe as they develop more resources for us. So make sure you tell others, keep sharing those stories, and that's how we're going to make a difference.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I think Lindell Gunton mentioned she shared on Twitter throughout the session. So thank you for your support there, Lindell, as well. And a whole lot of looking forward to the recording. Thanks, Claire and Jill. Please continue continue the library informational sessions, and the recording and handouts will be shared later after the meeting. So at 5 in Singapore time right now, it's 5:25, and I guess it's with that, I wish you a pleasant rest of the day or evening. Be safe and be healthy, and like what Claire mentioned, continue to learn and continue to share. So have a good evening, and take care, and goodbye from all of us right now. But if
And
you'd
last thank you,
like,
Rajan. Yeah, last thank you to Rajan for all of your coordination, your emceeing and everything. It's been great to have you coordinate it all.
you're most welcome. Thank you, Jill.